I made a promise I couldn't break, a truth they tried to erase from history, a key that held the answers to everything, a race against time, shadows, and the lies that bound us, and the fight I never thought I'd have to face alone, but this time, there was no turning back. The rain poured heavily as I stood outside the old bookstore, my heart pounding louder than the thunder above. The dim glow of the streetlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the wet pavement. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me, my fingers clutching the crumpled note in my pocket. Meet me where our story began. Midnight. Don't be late. The words were scribbled in a familiar handwriting, one I hadn't seen in 5 years. My hands trembled as I pushed open the bookstore's creaky door. The scent of aged paper and ink hit me instantly, transporting me back to a time when this place had meant everything. The shelves stood tall, filled with forgotten stories and whispered secrets. I stepped inside cautiously, my eyes scanning the dimly lit space. And then I saw her. Sitting at the far end, curled up with a book in her lap, was Myra. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, the same way it did the last time I saw her. But something about her seemed different, her eyes held an unspoken weight, a story left untold. She looked up, her gaze locking onto mine. You came, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. I swallowed hard. I almost didn't. Myra closed the book and placed it beside her. But you did. And that means you're ready. Ready for what? My voice wavered. She hesitated for a moment before reaching into her bag and pulling out an old, worn-out envelope. She handed it to me, her fingers brushing against mine for just a second, just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. I unfolded the letter carefully, my eyes darting over the words. And then, my world stopped. They lied to us. Everything we knew was a lie. It wasn't an accident. They took him. My breath hitched. I looked up at Myra, my pulse racing. Who took him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced over her shoulder, as if someone was listening. The people who are watching us right now. The weight of her words pressed against my chest like a vice. My fingers clenched the letter, my knuckles turning white. Who took him? I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. Myra exhaled sharply, her eyes darting toward the bookstore's entrance. The door creaked slightly, as if responding to some unseen force outside. We can't talk here, she said, standing up abruptly. Come with me. I hesitated. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I had never received the note, never stepped into this place. But the ache of curiosity, the longing for truth, was stronger. I followed her through a narrow corridor in the back, where an old wooden door led to the alleyway behind the store. The moment we stepped outside, the cold air bit at my skin. Myra didn't stop. She walked quickly, her boots splashing through puddles as we navigated the dimly lit streets. Myra, slow down, I urged. You still haven't told me what's going on. She finally stopped at a rusted metal gate, pushing it open with both hands. Beyond it lay an abandoned courtyard, overgrown with ivy. A single streetlight flickered, illuminating the cracked concrete ground. They're still looking for it, she said, turning to face me. And they think you have it. My stomach twisted. Have what? She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, weathered key. The proof. The key to everything they tried to bury. I stared at it. It looked ordinary, just an old brass key, but the way she held it, with such careful reverence, made it seem like something more. Where does it lead? I asked, my voice laced with uncertainty. Myra's expression darkened. To the answers you've been searching for. She took a deep breath. But getting there won't be easy. They will do anything to stop us. A sharp sound cut through the silence, footsteps approaching fast. Myra grabbed my wrist. We have to run. Now. We sprinted through the dark alleyways, our breaths ragged and uneven. The footsteps behind us grew louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. Myra took a sharp turn, leading us into an abandoned subway station. The stale air smelled of rust and neglect. Down here, she whispered urgently, pulling me toward the tracks. We slid into the shadows just as a group of men in dark coats entered the station. Their voices were low, but I caught bits and pieces of their conversation. She has the key. She's not alone. Find them. Myra grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. I held my breath as the men spread out, their flashlights scanning the station. One beam came dangerously close to where we hid. I felt my pulse in my throat. And then, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the tunnel. The men turned, rushing toward the noise. Myra didn't hesitate. Come on, she whispered, pulling me onto the tracks. We ran into the darkness, the cold steel rails guiding our escape. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew one thing for sure. We were running out of time. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching into blackness as we ran. Our footsteps echoed eerily off the damp walls, the faint trickle of water the only other sound. We can't outrun them forever, I panted, gripping Myra's arm. Where does this tunnel lead? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a flashlight from her jacket, flicking it on to reveal an old service door to the side. "Here," she whispered. "This should take us somewhere safe." I hesitated. "And if it doesn't? Then we'll find another way." Myra pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading up. We climbed quickly, my breath heavy in my chest. At the top, Myra pressed her ear against the door before nudging it open. We stepped into an old maintenance shed filled with rusted tools and broken furniture. A single window overlooked the city beyond. Myra locked the door behind us and turned to me. "We need to move fast. They won't stop until they have this key." I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. "Myra, what's really going on? Why is this key so important?" She hesitated before pulling an old envelope from her bag. "Because it's the last piece of the puzzle." I took the envelope from her hands, slowly opening it. Inside were newspaper clippings, photos, and a letter in the same handwriting as before. They thought they erased the truth. But secrets don't stay buried forever. A chill ran down my spine as I looked up at Myra. "Then we exposed them." Her lips curled into a determined smile. "Then we exposed them." A knock rattled the shed door. The knock on the shed door sent a jolt through me. Myra and I exchanged a glance, both knowing we had seconds to decide. "Stay quiet," she mouthed, backing away from the door. I held my breath as another knock echoed through the tiny space, this time more urgent. "Myra, we know you're in there." The voice was deep, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. Myra stiffened, her fingers tightening around the key in her palm. I didn't know who was outside, but the look in her eyes told me everything. She did. She grabbed my wrist and whispered, "We need an exit. Now." I scanned the shed. There was only one way out, the window. Myra was already moving, prying it open just as the doorknob rattled violently. "Hurry," she urged. I climbed through, dropping onto the damp grass outside. Myra followed, just as the door burst open behind us. "Stop them!" Voices erupted, but we were already sprinting into the night. The streets were empty, shadows stretching beneath the flickering streetlights. Myra led the way, taking sharp turns through alleyways and abandoned lots, never slowing. "Where are we going?" I gasped between breaths. "The only place they don't control," she said, pulling me toward a rusted gate. "If we make it there, we'll finally know the truth." She pulled the key from her pocket, gripping it like it held the answers to everything. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. We didn't have much time. With one final glance behind us, we pushed forward, toward the unknown. The rusted gate groaned as we pushed through, slipping into the darkness beyond. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the only sounds were our ragged breaths and distant footsteps closing in. Myra didn't stop. She pulled me forward through a narrow passageway between crumbling brick walls. My heart pounded, every nerve in my body screaming that we were being hunted. "They're too close," I hissed. "Where are we going?" She turned sharply, her eyes fierce. "To the archives." I frowned. "Archives? You mean like a library?" "Not just any library." She gripped my wrist tighter, leading me to an old wooden door barely visible in the darkness. "This place holds records they tried to erase." She shoved the key into the lock and twisted. The door creaked open, revealing a long corridor lined with metal filing cabinets and dusty shelves. Dim, flickering lights hummed overhead. Myra pulled me inside, slamming the door shut just as the sound of footsteps echoed outside. My breath hitched. We were trapped. She turned to me, whispering urgently, "If we don't find it now, we may never get another chance." I swallowed hard. "Find what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she darted toward a row of cabinets, scanning the labels with shaking fingers. "It has to be here." A loud bang shattered the silence. Someone was trying to break in. I backed against the wall, my pulse racing. "Myra." She found the right cabinet, yanking it open. Inside was a single, aged folder marked confidential. She pulled it out just as the door burst open behind us. And then, everything went black. Darkness. A throbbing pain in my head. My hands were cold, pressed against a hard surface. My vision blurred as I tried to move, my limbs sluggish and heavy. Where was I? Then, everything came rushing back, the archive room, the folder, the door bursting open. "Myra." My voice was hoarse. A soft groan came from nearby. I turned my head, blinking through the haze. Myra was slumped against a metal chair, her wrists bound. A dim, flickering bulb above cast eerie shadows across the room. We weren't in the archives anymore. "Look who's finally awake." A deep voice echoed in the small space. I turned to see a tall figure stepping out of the shadows. A man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the dim light. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his tone almost amused. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Myra lifted her head, her eyes defiant. "You're afraid," she spat. "Afraid of the truth." The man chuckled, shaking his head. Afraid? No. But I am disappointed. You should have left the past where it belongs. I struggled against the ropes around my wrists, the sharp fibers cutting into my skin. Where's the folder? I demanded. The man reached into his coat and pulled it out, waving it in front of us. This, he smirked. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. Myra's jaw clenched. That folder contains everything. Proof of the cover-up. Of what really happened to my brother. My breath caught. Her brother? The man sighed, flipping the folder open. You mean this? He held up a single, faded photograph. It's unfortunate, really. He took out a lighter. No! Myra screamed. Flames licked the edges of the paper, curling it into blackened ash. I pulled harder against the ropes, my heart pounding. This couldn't be how it ended. Think. Move. Act. I shifted my weight, rocking the chair back before throwing myself sideways. The impact was jarring, but the chair cracked, loosening the ropes enough for me to slip free. The man's head snapped toward me. I lunged. Myra twisted in her chair, kicking out her legs. Her foot connected with his knee, making him stumble. I grabbed the burning folder from his hands, slapping at the flames. The edges were scorched, but the papers inside were mostly intact. The man recovered quickly, his expression darkening. You just don't know when to quit, do you? He growled, reaching into his coat. A gun. I didn't think, I acted. I grabbed a heavy metal lamp from the table and swung it with everything I had. It connected with his wrist, sending the gun skidding across the floor. Myra was on her feet now, her ropes loose. She dove for the gun. The man cursed, lunging toward her. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the room. Silence. Myra stood, her hands trembling, the gun still aimed at him. The man staggered back, gripping his shoulder, blood seeping through his coat. His eyes burned with rage, but he didn't take another step. This is over, Myra said, her voice steady. You lost. He glared at us for a long moment before turning and disappearing through the back door. I exhaled shakily, my entire body trembling. Is it really over? Myra looked down at the folder in my hands. Not yet, she whispered. But it will be. She took my hand, squeezing it tight. Together, we walked out into the night, into the storm, the truth, and whatever came next.